Hello, I'm Lauren Haldeman, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Nutrition Education and Behavior, where we are advancing research, practice, and policy. Each month, we select an article to feature as a press release with an accompanying podcast. And today's podcast article can be read in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months. And today I'm really happy to be speaking with Albert Pan, who is the corresponding author for the research report titled School Meal Charge Policies Lack Consistency. I'm glad to have you with us today, Albert.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Sure thing. And will you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, my name's Albert. I graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2023 with a bachelor's in public health with a concentration specifically in nutrition. And as part of sort of the undergrad process at the Gilling School of Global Public Health, every student gets to participate in some kind of research by working with a research mentor. My particular mentor was Dr. Jessica Soldavini, who introduced me a lot into sort of nutrition policy research. And this paper is sort of the culmination of all that research that I was doing at that time.
Well, what a nice example of some excellent research conducted while you're an undergrad. So thanks again for being on with us. So can you talk a little bit about or give us a brief overview of the paper and why you chose to pursue this report?
Of course. So I guess this report discusses school meal charge policies nationwide, and then we take an in-depth look at the contents of these policies in North Carolina. And before we kind of jump into that, I would just want to note that for the purpose of this article, we define a meal charge as a charge placed on a student's account when, for whatever reason, they cannot pay for their school meal. And that we also define unpaid meal charges as meal debt. So when we looked into meal charge policies in North Carolina, we were primarily looking for three things. First, were we able to locate a meal charge policy in writing, typically through a school district's website. Some schools didn't necessarily have that sort of policy, and it could happen for a variety of reasons. Some schools were able to serve universal meals for all, even after the end of the COVID-19 waivers. Others had a more detailed series of protocols for their meal charges. Second, we were also looking at the parameters of each policy, right? So is there a limit on the amount of meal debt a student can accrue? Is there any differences in between age groups on how meal charges are handled? In some cases, we saw that high schoolers couldn't charge meals, but maybe elementary schoolers could. And then finally, we were looking for any listed actions a school district might try to take to recover any of that meal debt. Most commonly, we'd find that schools often listed the usage of third-party collection agencies. They also served alternative meals in some cases, or they might notify the Department of Social Services of suspected child neglect. And the reason we chose to pursue this report now is because during the pandemic, meal debt didn't accrue due to waivers offered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And that allowed for school meals to be served at no cost to all students, regardless of their background. Now, however, with the expiration of those waivers in 2022, school districts started to revert back to the usage of these meal charge policies. And so as they sort of kind of moved back to those policies, we wanted to see, what are some of the challenges that might be present within them, right? Are there any limitations? How clear are these policies? How easy is it for someone, looking for these policies to access that kind of information?
Thanks very much, Albert. This is such a timely topic, as you've already mentioned. As we're transitioning out of the pandemic waivers for school breakfast and school lunch, and really pushing towards advocating for universal school meals. So you've really tackled a very important issues. I also want to reiterate what you said. One of the benefits of school meals, universal school meals, is the elimination of school meal debt, which your report showed didn't accumulate during the pandemic with these waivers. And this to me is a very telling finding. We've touched on that. I want to turn our attention to just a little bit more of a detail in your article. You also mention in the article that school districts often provide alternate meals when a child's meal account is in debt. What are your thoughts on this? What did you learn?
Yeah. So, based on our research, an alternative meal is typically a meal served free of charge to a student that has already accrued the maximum amount of meal debt allowed within a particular school district's meal charge policy. That amount entirely varies on the school district. So some school districts might serve an alternative meal immediately. Others might allow you to charge a certain amount before they switch to those alternative meals. And an area of particular interest in our findings was that around 40% of school districts mentioned serving an alternative meal, but only 18% or less than 1/5 of those schools actually specify what's included in that meal, right? So that means said meal could theoretically range anywhere from like an apple to a regular full hot lunch. And aside from the potential nutrition concerns, right, the practice of serving alternative meals could generate something what we call lunch shaming, right? Where students can't pay for their food, they get singled out. They might have their regular lunch taken away and replaced with this meal. And we didn't look into it, quite so much, but we did, highlight that, hey, this could be an area of potential concern, right? If you're walking with your peers and like you can't eat the same lunch as them, how does that affect a student?
Yeah, this is something we've tried so hard to get rid of, is lunch shaming. So to find that some of these policies do bring that about is definitely concerning. This research report really emphasized the need for future research in this area. And so can you speak a little bit about the gaps in the current knowledge, which future studies really need to focus on, and how these findings really could impact local and national policy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say like the biggest gaps would certainly be, actually physically going to these school districts, right? Looking at these meal charges and seeing like, how does it actually handled, right? So although, our article does focus specifically on these policies, we did it entirely online, right? So we were typically going through a school website. We were, recovering their meal charge policy and noting specific things down. But we're not entirely certain whether or not all school districts follow their policy, right? Some school districts, for them, that might be an outdated policy. Others might have their own sort of unique protocol for how that meal debt is dealt with. And so I think it's important to understand, what is the reality on the ground versus just looking at something on paper. I would also advocate, in particular for research into lunch shaming, right? So when you serve an alternative meal to a student because they can't pay, right, is that going to affect a student's ability to learn? How are they compared to sort of their peers that aren't lunch shamed? And I think these findings could certainly influence, how we approach meal charge policies, both locally and nationally. On a local level, an individual school district already can change their meal charge policies, to safeguard a student's dignity, right? To avoid, taking away their hot lunch in front of all their peers and giving them, some sort of alternative meal. And then, at both at a federal and a state level, right, policymakers can pass provisions to regulate, how these meal charges are collected. Or they could even, take it a step further and provide funding for universal school meals. But none of that can happen, unless, we sort of understand, how this is affecting our students.
Yep, agreed. I think there are so many areas of future research from this work that you've done just in North Carolina. So I'll put you on the spot here. Any thoughts on doing this in a larger geographical area?
I certainly think it would be interesting, particularly like if we, North Carolina's done, right? That's 1 out of 50. I would absolutely love to look into, how does every state, sort of stack up in terms of, how many school districts serve alternative meals, right? How difficult is it to find a meal charge policy, for example, in Kentucky versus, a meal charge policy in North Carolina? And, certain states have different rules, right? Some states already have, provisions saying, you can't lunch shame, or, you can't, maybe they already provide, extra funding for universal meals within certain areas. So seeing like, just geographically, maybe how that might change as well would certainly be interesting to me.
Yeah, there's certainly a broad spectrum of how school districts handle this topic. And I want to really thank you for addressing this. It's a pretty gigantic topic, and one that is under great discussion right now at all levels, local, state, and federal levels. I also want to mention again to our listeners that you conducted this work as an undergraduate researcher, which is pretty impressive. So, so for all of the listeners who might also be at this stage of their academic training, what can you say about how this experience might have impacted your career trajectory or your planned trajectory?
Um, I would say this experience has certainly made me more interested in academic research as a whole, um, and potentially pursuing that in any future career plans that I might have. This has been such an amazing learning experience, and although you might face setbacks or challenges, you're never facing them alone. I've received so much guidance from Dr. Soldavini. I've gotten so much guidance from my peers, and I just want to say I'm forever grateful to them for introducing me to research. I think it's really helping me think deeper um, on the sort of challenges individuals face in their daily lives, and I hope I can carry that forward as I pursue a dream of becoming a medical doctor.
Great. Well, kudos to you and Dr. Soldavini for this great work. And again, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add? You kind of touched a little bit on it, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
I want to once again first and foremost thank Dr. Soldavini at the University of North Carolina for all of her advice and mentorship. I never would have come this far without all of her support, especially being completely new to research. I would also like to thank Dr. Lindsay Dr. Lindsay Haynes Maslow at the University of North Carolina, along with Morgan Graham and Mariana Wendt from the North Carolina Alliance for Health for reviewing, providing feedback during the writing process. And I would also like to thank the Carolina Hunger Initiative for allowing me to intern with them and see all their amazing work firsthand. And then finally, I'd like to thank the reviewers over at JNEB for all their feedback during this review process. It's been, once again, such an eye-opening learning experience and an amazing opportunity every step of the way. And none of this could have happened without each and every single one of these individuals. So thank you so much.
Sure thing. And I always like to hear that. So thank you for saying that. And thank you also for spending this time with me today, Albert. To all of our listeners, remember, you can read this article in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months.